know something interesting is sure to happen. Well, I think you ought to tell me who you are first. Mr. Rabbit? Then why did you ask the question?
Goodness, this is quite extraordinary.
Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?
But today is turning into the most curious adventure I have ever had.
Welcome to the Alice in Wonderland podcast. I'm Georgia Ellis, and thank you for joining me as we tumble down yet another rabbit hole together. And I can't wait to get curious with today's guest, Damien Munro. So Damien is the Heal Your Life teacher trainer for Australia and New Zealand, as well as an author and contributor to magazines and online platforms. He is featured in international media like Fox, CBS, NBC, ABC, and announced as the top spiritual leader by both Visionary Insight Press and the G.U.R.U Academy. Damien's philosophy is, when we remove negative thinking, the only thoughts left are positive. He says there's no big secret. It doesn't take a miracle cure, just a willingness to look within and eliminate negative thinking. So let's get curious. Welcome, Damien.
Thanks for having me, Georgia. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. We've got a few things to talk about based on what we've read out there in your bio. Now, there's a question that I ask everyone that I kick off my podcast with, but before I get to that, I want to just be, full disclosure here. I've known Damien for quite some time. We met, I think it was in 2013. Was it 2013 or 14?
We re-met in 2013, but we had actually met each other at an event many years before that. Do you remember?
Probably not, so you might have to remind me.
It was a Born Rich program many years earlier. And we'd forgotten about it. And then we saw each other in 2013 at the Heal Your Life teacher training. And it was like, oh my God, we were at the same event.
That's right. Thank you for the reminder. So I have known Damien for some time, and our paths sort of divert and convert and come back across and cross over. And Damien now is, we went to and did the Heal Your Life teacher training, which was based on Louise Hay's Heal Your Life book and all the work she did. And then we went on our own separate paths, and Damien now is the representative of that training here in Australia and New Zealand. So we've just wanted to full disclosure that I have known this amazing person for some time, and I can't wait to unpack what he's been up to because I haven't spoken to him for a little bit. So let's start with the question, Damien. So
let's do it.
So I want you to imagine that I am Alice from Alice in Wonderland, and I'm, being a little girl walking through Wonderland, and I bump into you. And I look at you and I go, who are you? What are you here for? How would you answer what you do in this world and who you are to a 7-year-old girl?
I would say I'm a teacher of love. I help you to eliminate those thoughts that are getting in your way and stopping you from falling deeply and madly in love with yourself. Because when we get rid of those negative thoughts, the only space left is space for love.
Beautiful. So talk to us more about why it's important for us to fall in love with ourselves, because I know, on some of the journey I've been on and some of the people I work with, that's one of the hardest things people can do. So why do you believe it's important to fall in love with ourselves?
Well, I believe that after working with so many clients for such a long period of time now, that the number one thing that it always comes back down to is a belief that we aren't good enough, that we don't deserve to be happy, or that we have to work really, really hard at that happiness in order for us to feel good. And then there's always the belief that I will feel good about myself when, and fill in the blank. So it's when I get the new job, or I get the car, or I get the relationship, or I get the wage that I've been looking for, or I hit this unobtainable goal. And then you get there and you find that it hasn't fixed the way that you feel about yourself. It hasn't fixed the quote unquote problem that's really going on. And there's no satisfaction there. And I learned that myself through working in the corporate world. I'd been doing spiritual work for quite some time, and then I was like, oh, maybe I need to go and do some corporate world work, and be a bit more sophisticated with what I was doing, so to speak. And the funny thing was, I got there and I wasn't any happier. Sure, I was earning more, I had more going on in my life, and I had great relationships, but there was still something underneath it all that really felt as though things were still missing. I wasn't happy. I wasn't enjoying my life. Even though the things that I'd always wanted were there. So the answer isn't the having of the things. And I don't think that it's a problem that we can really arrive at on our own without going through those stages and then finding out. I call it, going through the checkbox of life. We tick off all the things that we think we're supposed to do or should do according to society. Then we get there and we go, well, now what? Because I'm still not happy. And whenever I'm working with a private client, or when I was working on my own stuff, the number one thing that I found was I always got to the bottom of it, and it was, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve to be happy, and I'll never be enough. And what's the opposite to that is I love myself, and I love who I am, and I love my life. And so it's not until we fall down that rabbit hole of, always seeking to find the answer, that we get to the point of it and we go, oh, I'm just never going to be good enough. That's a really good sign. The enemy out of the whole thing is probably the negative thinking. But what we've learned over time is that we've been conditioned to think that way, because it's what will so-and-so think, or what will, what will our parents think? What will the neighbors think? Or, what will my mother think if I don't do it right? Or, all of these things. So it's a matter of really coming down to, I am good enough the way that I am. I am worth loving. I am somebody that is valuable, and I do deserve to have a good life. But it's not always easy to get there. Like you said, it's an easy thing to say, if you can't love yourself, then how can you love anybody else? That's an easy thing to say. So we need to have some guidelines to get there. And it's nobody's fault that we think or believe these things about ourselves. It's not your fault that you feel those things. The reason that you feel those things is because we are conditioned by society to believe that. You turn on the news and you see murder and mayhem. The saying of news is, if it bleeds, it reads. So they're going to show you more graphic material because they want you to pick it up and read it. You pick up a magazine, and of course it's going to have things that say, this person wasn't good enough, they got surgery, now look at what and then we're judging and criticizing them for the surgery that they've had. So you try to fix the problem, but underneath it, you're still going to be judged and criticized. So that's the modern curse of our world that we currently live in. So it's not anybody's particular fault.
I love what you're saying there around, I don't love what you're saying. It's very wise what you're saying there around the negative thinking piece of us, because it does become ingrained. But I think also, not just from our conditioning, but also genetically, we have these, we're actually programmed to spot negativity out in our world, not just within ourselves, for survival. So we're more predisposed to negative thinking than what we'd like to be most of the time. And then wrapped up in that is our own negative thinking about ourselves and our own self-worth. So talk to me about how this whole idea of shifting negative thinking to a different type of thinking has helped shape your life. And is it Is it an easy process?
It is easy. However, it takes practice. So it's two sides of one coin. Let's go back to what you were saying about how our brain is conditioned to see those negative things. That's really from the reptilian part of our brain. And we've all heard of fight or flight. That's from that really early evolutionary stage of our brain where we're hardwired to stay away from danger. And if we see something negative that's going on in our world, we run from that fear. And I've coined a little term for that. I call it running from the saber-toothed tiger. Right? So we wake up every morning and our first saber-toothed tiger attacks us. We call it our alarm. We then need to run from the next saber-toothed tiger, which is the clock, which is getting ready for work on time. And if we've got kids or a family that we also need to get ready, that's the third saber-toothed tiger. Then we get in the car and we've got a sixth saber-toothed tiger, or we get on the train, or we're, trying to get to work. By that time, we've been attacked by 7 saber-toothed tigers we couldn't possibly get away from. And so we're already in a mental state of fight or flight, or fear and anxiety, if you want to put it in our current terminology, before we've even left the door. So this is where it becomes the hard part of the puzzle. And it's not necessarily that it's hard, it's a matter of becoming aware of what am I thinking and feeling. So if I wake up first off and my alarm's going off and I think, oh no, not another shitty day, then guess what we're going to have? That's going to trigger our next thing that's going to be the next stage. So we've got to be aware of our thinking first. And for a lot of us, we've been living our lives on autopilot, and we're not aware of the thoughts that we've had up until this point. And that's okay. That's, we haven't had the practice. Nobody's said to us, you are what you think, pay attention to. And I know that people that are listening to your podcast are definitely aware of that, or otherwise they wouldn't have been attracted to it. But for general society, it's just this daily cycle of just go through the daily motions and get things done. That's where it's tricky for us to change our thinking. Now, it takes practice because we haven't gotten to this particular point in our life overnight. We've got years of mental patterns and rewiring of the brain and neural networks that have wired and fired together for such a long period of time, if we want to get into the neuroscience of it, which is exciting because I don't normally talk about this sort of stuff when I'm on a podcast. It's more so the touchy-feely emotional side of stuff. So the science shows that we've got this brain map that when we think a certain way for a long period of time, it's like wiring being soldered together. And so when we first start to shake loose of those beliefs and ideas by first becoming aware of it, we feel what's called cognitive dissonance on the inside. Now, cognitive dissonance to me is like putting a screwdriver in the back of your old tube set TV box. The old ones that have got the big lamp in there and it would give you all that static and be like, shh. That's what cognitive dissonance feels like. So what can happen when we first start to change our thinking is we get this cognitive dissonance come up and we go, oh no, it doesn't feel right. And we get frightened again, and then we shut it all down. So it can take years of practice for many of us of going through this. I'll try a little bit and then we get a bit of an improvement, and then cognitive dissonance kicks in and all that static comes up and we go, we get frightened by it, and then we shut it all back down. Because who would I be if I was to change?
That's $1 million question, isn't it?
Absolutely. Who would I be if I changed? You know who you would be? You would realize that you are a beautiful, perfect person who was born to live a life that is good. But we don't have an idea or a vision of that. And I actually wrote down a little manifesto that I've got just before we got on this podcast, because I was doing some work on some other things. And this is who I think we would be if we learnt to let it all go. And I've called it the I Am Beautiful Manifesto. So I am beautiful. I define my own self-worth because I create my own beliefs. I build myself up. I change my thinking and I can change my life. I am just one positive thought away.
That's so good, isn't it? And it's
Yeah.
interesting how you say that. And I want to go back to something you said earlier. You know, when you said, you know, it's easy, but it takes practice. I can remember through my own transformation many years ago, it was actually a quote by Louise Hay, believe it or not, that actually made me realize. And she's just, and I didn't get it at first. And she said, the process is really simple, but it's not easy. I'm sitting there going, how can something be simple and not easy? Like I sat with that for a very long time. And then I realized, to the point that you're making here, is the process of noticing your thoughts and then choosing a different thought is a really easy process, a simple process, very simple process. However, it's not easy because it takes determination, it takes practice, and it takes time to rewire those neural connections. And I think that's something that for the listeners to be really, really conscious of, that over time, if you do the work and you start to master those daily noticing of the thoughts, that you will notice a difference. It's sometimes it happens overnight, rarely, but sometimes you can get those really massive shifts in neural connections. That's a deep emotional impact, but most of the time it's going to take repetition, and that's the practice part, right? So imagine if you imagine if the manifesto that you wrote out, that if I was somebody who continually had negative thoughts about myself, my situation, imagine if I just read that out to myself and really connected with it at a heart base, you know, and really connected with it emotionally. If I read that every day, what would that do? So what would that do if our listeners could go back and just rewind to that point and listen to those words?
Imagine if you were just willing to show up and do that manifesto every day. How different life would be in a week, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 6 months, 12 months from now. How different would it be if you started to begin to see the evidence of these new thought patterns? I'm not just talking about believe it. I'm talking about, you know, somebody starting to say to you, you know, you really are beautiful. And you're going, wow, you know what? That manifesto that I've been doing, that affirmative treatment that I've been doing for myself, that's one thing I've been saying to myself. Other people are now recognizing that. That must be becoming true for me. So, you know, that's why at the end I've put, I am just one positive thought away. Because what happens when we start this work, we start doing the positive thinking, and then something goes wrong. Like we might be affirming for more abundance. We lose our wallet. We go, see, I knew this was never going to work. No, I am just one positive thought away. Because we can slip into those old negative patterns so easily. Because I've heard a saying like this before, that our thinking patterns are just like a comfortable bed, easy to fall into, but not so easy to get out of. Because we know them so well. We've been living there for so long that it's normal and natural for us to think that way. So when we start thinking a positive new thought, it's not normal and natural for us. It might be normal and natural for other people. And so it's easy to point our finger and go, it's all right for them because they've got their life working and they don't understand where I've come from. And it's true because they've moved from that point to where they are now. And some people are just blessed and they were born into lives where things just seem to be easy. Now, I know that wasn't me and I know that it wasn't you. So we're both talking from experience here when it comes to putting into practice the work that we're talking about. And it's just one positive thought away. If I can think one more positive thought today than I had yesterday, then my life will be different. You know, a little bit by little bit by little bit. You do a little bit every day and eventually you end up with a lot.
It's like the snowball effect, right?
Absolutely.
So I want to go back to, because you mentioned, you know, you weren't, you know, born with a silver spoon in your mouth and life wasn't that easy. So how did this work help transform you personally?
Well, I grew up in a really small country town in Victoria on the banks of the Murray River. So if you're internationally in Australia, I'm talking about a country town that's got about 10,000 people living in it, really backward views on who you are and how you're supposed to live. And to, top that off, I am gay. I was gay. I am gay. And, the viewpoint of that is that's not okay. It's not normal. It's not natural. What will everybody else think? And if that, one of the things that I was told when I was younger, if that is true, you will end up with AIDS and you will die. That was the information I was given. I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do here because I don't know what else I'm supposed to be. That's just who I am. And I tried to change who I was to fit into this straight life system. And it didn't work. I ended up with depression. I ended up with severe anxiety where I would be literally shaking from head to toe, freezing cold, but sweating at the same time. I literally thought I was going to die. And that would happen most times every day. And I was living in that fear that something bad was going to happen just because of who I was and how I was born. So I escaped. I call it escaped. I moved to the city and I started to find other people that were also like me, that were gay, that were living really successful lives. And I thought, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. And that's where the work started. But the problem that was already existing was I was already suffering from anxiety and depression. And I could have stayed there because that was easy and, I could just take a tablet and that would deal with it. But my parents, and although they didn't accept who I was with my sexuality, my parents gave me some really vital information. They said, why don't you try something else first? Don't try medication to start off with, because once you're on medication, then it's going to be harder for you to go back and change. But if it doesn't work, then try medication. And I have nothing against anybody taking medication because there is really big need for medication in the world. So that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that when we really start to look into the beliefs and the ideas that we hold about ourselves, we can then start to define whether those beliefs and ideas are really true for us. And so when I was 23 with all of this stuff going on, I was fired from my job and I was about to become homeless within a few days and life got really messy. Well, that was the time where it was my darkest hour and also my most important hour, because I really considered ending it all. That was the best option. That's what I thought at the time. It's like, if I could just end my life, then the pain goes away. But there was a deep voice inside of me that kept saying, you're more than this. Not you're better than this, because that implied that I wasn't good enough. You're more than this. There's more for you in this life than just ending it all. There's something else that you're meant to be doing. And the reason why you feel as bad as you feel is because what you're doing doesn't match up with your purpose here. And I was like, okay, well, what's my purpose? As we all do, like if you're in the middle of, hellfire and brimstone and the world's burning down around you, you kind of ask yourself, well, what is my purpose here on earth? And I remembered back to when I was about 11 years old, I'd come across this book called You Can Heal Your Life. And I thought, oh, gee, I wonder where that copy is. So it was within a week, I'd found another copy of it and I'd started reading, and I just started to apply the principles of what do I really think and believe about myself, my life, relationships, finances, career, all of these things. And within a week, I'd started to get things back on track again. I'd found another job. Sure, it wasn't paying much. It was selling oranges at a, like, I mean, I did all sorts of things back in the day to get myself out of those situations. I was selling oranges at a fruit store on a microphone because that was like, I had to get myself out of that situation. I had to pay rent. There was nothing, and I needed to do it quickly. There was no point waiting for Centrelink to come in, although I'd applied for it. There was no point because I was thousands of dollars in debt. It wasn't going to cover what the bank was chasing me for, and it wasn't going to cover rent. So I needed a way out. So I took these little jobs and I started to build myself up. And then I went off and I worked for Estee Lauder, and then I started going into the corporate world after that. And I got my feet and I found my way, but it's because first I changed my thinking. I started to change my thinking about who I was and what I deserved. And then I forgot about Heal Your Life again because my life was working. And it wasn't until years later when I was working in the financial services industry that I was stressed out, burnt out, lacking energy, didn't like my boss didn't like me. And I was basically, I achieved the things that I thought that I needed to achieve in life so that I was worth something. And I felt worthless again. And I sat down at the computer and I went, I need to change. What do I need to change? And I typed in Heal Your Life workshops randomly. And that brought me to the Heal Your Life teacher training. So, it's interesting how life will keep bringing you back to where you're supposed to be. Life will keep bringing you back to a certain path. And we can push against it for a certain period of life. But the interesting thing is life continues to fall away around you until you get back onto the path that you're supposed to be on. And it doesn't matter how many times you stray from that path, life will always bring you back to that. It's almost like that is a divine, I call it divine life purpose. It's not, I wouldn't say destiny. I'd say that's, I don't think we have a destiny. I think we define that for ourselves, but there is a life path that we all seem to be on. There's a reason that we're all supposed to be here. And I believe that it's to bring more light into the world in whatever way that means for you. And life just kept bringing me back to this book, You Can Heal Your Life. And I never set out to become the Heal Your Life teacher trainer for Australia and New Zealand. In fact, that was probably one of the things that I thought I wouldn't ever want to be. Mm-hmm. But life just kept bringing me back to that. And it's this process that you end up in awe with, that the more you clear out and clean out the stuff that's hiding underneath, life kind of takes you onto the trajectory that you're supposed to be on. I really do believe that.
I agree with you because I've had similar journeys and similar realizations around how that simple shift in thinking can change the way we feel, the actions we take, and therefore, the results we're getting. For you, Damien, has it been all rainbows, roses, and unicorns since you started to learn how to change your thinking?
No.
Good. Because here's the thing. A lot of people think that, positive thinking, it's what it's all about. But actually, no, I think people need to understand that it's a tool and it's an awareness. And, if we look at some of Seligman's work out of positive psychology, it actually does help you create a better life and a different perspective, and it will serve you greatly. But it's not going to be the thing that saves your life all of the time, right?
Yeah, I think, one of the interesting things about life is it will always throw things your way that you weren't expecting. But what positive thinking and learning how to deal with your mental and emotional state allows you to do is to be able to manage those situations in life much easier than if you didn't have those skills. There's been plenty of times since I started this work that I could have really done a lot of numbers on myself and gone into a lot of fear and a lot of worry but instead being able to say, you know what, I'm safe, all is well, out of this situation, only good will come. It's not putting a fluffy cloud over things and pretending that it's not a problem. It's accepting things for where they are so that I can make peace with it much faster, get out of fear and then get into action. And I know one of Bob Proctor's favorite things is saying the only times that we ever tend to get creative is when there's a crisis going on in our lives. Why does it take until there's a crisis before we start to become creative? And I really think that that's true. You know, we don't have to wait until there's a crisis before we decide to do something in our life. The crisis tends to be a big catalyst for a lot of us because we can't keep going on the way that things were. But once you start to change your thinking, you start to learn how to navigate situations in a much, much gentler and calmer way. When you think calmly, that opens you up to a whole new world of creativity. So I wish it was rainbows and lollipops and unicorns and pink fluffy clouds, but you know, every storm has a rainbow. So yes, it might be rainbows and sunshine and lollipops, but there's also storms that could be going on. And as long as you dress appropriately for the weather, then you can have a great time.
I love that saying. It's one of my favorite quotes. I love what you're saying there around having the ability to navigate, which is, I think, one of the things that we forget about. And so this idea of changing our thinking is the first step to give us the ability to step back, see a different perspective, and I think notice in a situation, so notice in the storm that, hey, there's stuff happening, we're getting water, where, you know, what are the things, what are the positives in it? Because yes, there are negatives, what we perceive as negatives, and yes, there will be positives, but how can we focus more on the positive and use those to become creative and resourceful in moving forward? And I think that's the gift in being able to shift our thinking. It's not denying that there is things out there in the world that do not serve us and things that potentially don't help us at all and make us feel, you know, anxiety, stress, fear. We're not denying that, and we're not saying, hey, just think positively and everything will be okay. It's use this as a tool to navigate through those situations so you can continue to rise up, build your awareness and grow, right?
One of the most important things in any of those times of difficulty is to, excuse me, one of the most important things to think in those times of difficulty is, I am safe. I am safe, because what's really going on when we're having an anxiety attack is we're feeling attacked. It's called anxiety attack for a reason. So we're anxious that we're not going to be able to get out. That saber-toothed tiger is coming to attack us. Well, most of it exists in our own mind. It's not happening in the physical world. You know, the alarm clock goes off, but our reaction to the alarm clock isn't that the alarm clock is actually attacking us. But the same patterns are happening in our brain as though we were being attacked by that saber-toothed tiger. And so what we've got to say to ourselves is, I am safe. I am safe. Hey, I'm here with you. You know, everything's good. And talk to yourself in the third person. Everything is going to be okay. It's a little bit like a parent taking hold of a young child and hugging them when they're frightened and saying, do you know what? It's going to be okay. You're safe. I'm here with you. And calming yourself down. We become irrational when we're in that state of mind. So if we can just be aware of, how do I feel now? How do I feel in this moment? Then, you know, the power of now is one of the most important, powerful philosophies that there are. How do I feel now? Because that might have changed from 5 minutes ago. So to then be able to say, oh, you know what, I'm not feeling so good. I can feel safe in this moment. I am safe and all is well. And then we start calming ourselves down. Then we can start putting those positive thoughts in, or we can do something with those thoughts or feelings. If I'm feeling really angry, just telling myself, you know, you'll be okay, everything's going to be all right, I love you, and blah, 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 is not going to deal with the anger. You've got to do something with that. That's a lot of energy to be carrying around. And if you just stuff it down, then it's going to end up eating away at the body. So do something productive with it. Beat a pillow, turn on some loud music, jump up and down. Then this is where it's really important. Eliminate the negative thinking. Now, anger, and nothing's really negative. It's just our perception of it. So if we think that the anger is getting too much for us, or we're trying to stuff it down, or we've got aches and pains in our body, do something with that anger so that you can eliminate it and let it go, release it. Then once you've released it, now you've got space for the positive thoughts to come in. But if you just tried to think positive thoughts first, the anger is still going to be there. So we need to really clear the space out. And I think of it like a cup of dirty water. Our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions, they build over time. And that's like putting dirt in the bottom of a cup and then putting water in on top of it, and it all mixes together. And then we think a positive thought, that's like one drop going into this cup of dirty water. We've got to think a lot of positive thoughts to clear that water out. It takes a lot of time to do that. But what happens once we start, changing our thinking so that we can change our life? It's like taking a spoon and stirring that water up. So the old stuff is going to come to the surface. You get the opportunity to reassess and decide whether that belief serves you or not. Once you do that, you can actually go, you know what, that doesn't serve me anymore. I choose to let it go. I'm willing to release it and let it go. That's tipping a little bit of that water out of that cup. Now you've got more space. When you put the clear water in, it's going to be more effective. But what if we just started to go, okay, what are my thoughts, feelings, and emotions? And one of the things that Louise always says, it comes down to the big four: fear, anger, resentment, and guilt. So that's fear, anger, resentment, and guilt. And then you throw a little bit of criticism in there just to make sure that you feel really bad about yourself. If we start working with those and asking, do I feel fear? Do I feel anger? Do I feel resentment? Do I feel guilty? Or am I criticizing myself in this moment? We can start to do something with it and let it go. And then we can start putting that positive new thought pattern in the top by thinking a new affirmation or choosing a new goal for ourselves and setting those goals from a place that isn't emotionally charged with the wrong emotions. Probably wrong isn't the right word, but emotions that are not serving the purpose. And we've then got the positive emotions that are going to serve the purpose. We feel excited, we feel energized, we feel joyous, we feel great about what we're attracting, rather than feeling the fear or the concern or the worry that it's not going to come and manifest. So we know that our emotions are very attractive in nature. And we've got a lot of people that are setting goals and things from that place of fear and worry. And then the time passes, in X amount of time, I'm so happy and grateful now that I have ... X amount of time passes, and then we feel bad about who we are because ... didn't happen. Because we didn't do anything to clear that stuff out that's getting in the way of manifesting it in the first place. And so I really find that when we clear out all those negative emotions underneath it, working on the goal is not really working on the goal. It just kind of takes care of itself because we've removed the thing that was getting in the way energetically or vibrationally, that was putting a charge in there that's pushing it away. And it's almost like it manifests like magic.
Beautiful. I want to rewind a little bit to something you said there around testing your beliefs. Now, I find that really powerful, a really powerful practice to do. And I work with my clients, and I'm sure you're working with your clients through those things as well. Especially, I just want to make a point before I ask you a question. So we tend to look at our lives and make these assumptions based on what other people believe, and then we will then judge that belief as being good or bad. So what we need to understand is our beliefs are ours alone, and to take on someone else's beliefs without testing them for ourselves can be really quite dangerous. So if someone believes that I don't know, I'm just going to use something really like paleo diet's the best diet ever, right? This is a belief, an assumption that if I eat just a certain way, I'm going to end up with certain results. Yeah, that might work for somebody, but it might not work for you. So it's about testing the beliefs that you have. So we have these assumptions and beliefs that, you know, go along in the background of our life, in the programming, in the subconscious mind. How would you recommend, or what would you recommend for our listeners to be able to identify beliefs and then test those beliefs or assumptions to check whether they are actually serving them, worth keeping, or, you know, not serving them and worth replacing? How do you help people through that?
One of the easiest ways is to ask ourselves, what does my life look like in that area? So if my finances are a mess, there's probably some beliefs there that have to do with money. Let's go with the keto belief that you've got, that we just used as an example, not that you have.
I don't have it.
The keto example that you used is, you know, well, keto diet is the best diet for everybody. Well, everybody's body is different. So how do I test that? I try it. Or if I've been following it for a period of time and I'm not getting the result that I expect that I would get over that amount of time, there's two things that are probably going on. One is that keto is not appropriate for me. Or have I really been following it? And am I really being honest with whether I've been following it or not? So either it serves us or it doesn't. But if I've not been following it, then there's probably a part of me that doesn't really believe it's going to work for me anyway. So that might be something totally different. And that could be a self-worth issue. And it's got nothing to do with paleo or diet whatsoever. And I find that, you know, when we do start looking at beliefs, it doesn't matter where we start. It will lead us on its own little journey. So we might start thinking, you know what, I'm feeling stressed. I'm going to start doing a meditation practice. We might start meditating. Within a week into our meditation practice, we think, do you know what? I might start cleaning up my diet. And then we take more of a nutritional approach. And then after a little while, we're doing our nutrition thing, we're doing our meditation. And then we think, do you know what? I think I might need to start doing some exercise. So we start doing exercise. And what happens is we start treating the self as a whole. We start working with mind and body and spirit and emotions. And it doesn't matter where you start on that journey, it always leads to the next stage. But it's really important to test where our beliefs are when we start. You know, if I, you know, let's throw another one out there. If I believe that sex was dirty and bad, then I'm probably not going to have relationships that are working properly. Or I will be risky in sex but never commit to a loving relationship. Tends to be, you know, how those sorts of things go. And a lot of us are really frightened to even talk about those things because we think, oh no, that's too taboo. You can't talk about that. That's a belief in
itself, right?
And so absolutely. And so, you know, if we believe those things, then, you know, we'll feel ourselves step back from a conversation, or we'll feel ourselves frightened or worried to talk about, you know, what our thoughts or our feelings are, because we've got certain beliefs about that are not in accordance with somebody else. And I used to have an ex that was always had money. Well, my financial life absolutely sucked. And I never had any. And I used to look at him and I'd be really angry and resentful of the fact that he always had money and I earned more than he did. And why was I in more debt than he was? And I asked myself one day, you know, I'd been doing this work for a while and I thought, what's he say to himself? What does he say to himself that's different than what I say to myself? That's where the testing comes in. And I came to the conclusion that I was always saying, oh no, I can't have that, or I can't do that. And he was always saying, I work hard for my money. I deserve to treat myself. Totally different. And I went, that's why his life works with money. And that's why mine doesn't. And I thought, well, you know what? All I've got to do is start saying, I work hard for my money. I deserve to treat myself. And honestly, within 3 weeks, things changed. And I'd been trying to work on my financial mindset and my financial goals for such a long period of time, and nothing was happening. But I wasn't working with the underlying belief of what was getting in the way. And that was, I can't have this and I don't deserve. And even though I was saying, you know, I am abundant and life is a joy and money comes to me freely and easily, it might come, but why would it want to if I was saying, oh, even if I did have it, oh, I can't have that. So life would just go, well, we're not even going to give it to you because what's the point?
Or you'd get it, or you'd
saying,
self-sabotage.
I deserve to have, or, you know, I work hard for my money. I deserve to have that. You know, I deserve to treat myself from time to time. Absolutely. I'd just put myself further in debt because that was my idea. My idea was I don't deserve, or I can't have. And so life just kept reflecting that belief. It kept saying, well, okay, here you go. And, you know, it was a lie the whole time. But we believe the lies that we tell ourselves until they become true.
Self-fulfilling prophecies, I think.
Absolutely.
So I think there's some really powerful information that you've passed on there around these belief systems that we have, which is entwined with our thinking, because our thinking, if we keep thinking the same thing over and over again, it will eventually become a subconscious belief and an assumption, and our perception, the way we view the world, and then we take actions based on that. So helping people to understand, which is what you've just done, that we can question and start to test those beliefs. So test what you believe with the results you're getting, and ask yourself, like you're saying, is this true for me? Is it true 100% of the time? Have I done the work that actually is behind this belief as well? So I think there's some really valuable information and some gold wrapped up in what you've just said there. So I'm going to sort of change directions here. So based on your journey and where you are today and everything that you've been through up until this point, and I know there's plenty more ahead of you, what would be your greatest lesson out of this journey of self-realization and, you know, discovering that you are enough? What's your greatest lesson that you could share with our listeners?
Learning to trust that right now you are in the right place. Trust is the biggest dissolver of all issues. Trust and self-love. So if you can love yourself in this moment and trust that the next steps are going to be there for you, and make peace with whatever is going on. You know, I am safe. I trust life and I love myself enough to know that whatever is coming next is always going to be more than where I am now. It will change everything.
I have a question for you. I'm not sure if you can answer this, because you said, you know, to tell yourself I love myself in this moment is extremely difficult for some people, because they're going to sit there and go, but I don't love myself. Why would I tell myself that? How can somebody who has deep levels of anxiety, fear, deep levels of unworthiness, guilt, how can they tell themselves in a moment that they love themselves? How do you help people with that?
One of the fastest ways to do that is to look into the mirror and to say to yourself, even though I don't believe it right now, I am one day willing to maybe someday be willing to learn to love you. And take a step back from trying to make it happen in the now. Just keep putting it out into the future, because eventually the future will match up with where you are. And it will be difficult, you know, it will be tricky. But like we were saying before, it might be simple, but it isn't easy. And it takes practice and it takes time. But if you go to the mirror and you tell yourself, I love you, I really, really love you, it will create miracles in your life. It really will.
I have to attest to that because I've done it. But can I just get you to repeat what you said around, even though you might not feel it, but you can go to the
Even though
mirror.
I don't believe it right now, even though I don't believe it right now, I could be willing to maybe someday be willing to learn to love you.
Beautiful. I think that's a really lovely place to sort of wrap up, and just that words of advice. And for people to start saying that to themselves in the mirror would make the world, I think, a really different and better place. We can all move forward together. So for our listeners, if they would love to get a hold of you, listen to any of your work, get involved with what you're doing, how can they reach you?
You can find me on both Insta and Facebook as @Damien Munro Official, or check out the website, which is damienmunro.com. And I've got plenty of free resources and things there, like the 7-day self-care challenge and the free book, Confidence Secrets, Why You Don't Feel Confident and How to Fix That. All of those are free to download from any of those places. So if you want to jump on Instagram or Facebook, you'll find me there as Damien Munro Official, or damienmunro.com as the website.
Beautiful. I have one final question. You might have already covered it, but I'm going to just ask you one final question. As we part our way, and our listeners are just, champing at the bit, going, I just want one piece of advice from Damien. I just want to hear one piece of advice. What would you pass on from your journey to listeners to recommend that they do to help themselves move forward in life and to love themselves, besides the mirror? Anything else?
One of the biggest things that I struggled with the most was believing in myself. And I had a boss that told me a few times, your biggest problem is that you are really smart, you are really intelligent, you are really bright. And I believe that anybody who's listening to this is smart and intelligent and bright. But the one thing that you don't do is you don't believe in yourself enough. And so I would recommend that anybody that's listening to sit down and either write 10 to 20 times a day for the next 10 days, I believe in you, on a piece of paper. I believe in you. I really believe in you. Or if you want to take it to the next level, to look into the mirror and say, as you point to yourself in the mirror, I believe in you. I really believe in you. And I tell you what, that, if you can't say I love myself, that will be the next best piece of advice that I could give anybody. Practice, having those positive thoughts that you want to have for yourself, and your life will really change. It really will.
Thank you. That is such awesome advice. So for our listeners, go grab your mirror and start talking positively to yourself as your first step. So thank you so much, Damien. Absolute delight as always to talk with you, and thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Today is turning into the most curious adventure I've ever had.